My name is Clare and today I will be talking to you about my article, The Case of Booker T. Washington High School, How Post-Disaster Urban Growth Produces Environmental Risk and Racism. So the context of this research is really building on fantastic work by other scholars, particularly around urban growth machine. So the creation and accumulation of capital through the development and redevelopment of cities and urban spaces. Research on risk society, that part of our bargain for living in a modernized world is that we incur greater levels of risk. And finally, environmental racism within environmental justice scholarship. So understanding the drivers and consequences, as well as the characterization of environmental harms, hazards, and burdens in marginalized and minoritized communities. So in this article, I use a case study approach, an explanatory building technique that shows how disaster reinvestment can create environmental risks that amount to environmental racism. And so the way that I do that is through the case of the Booker T. Washington High School, located in the heart of New Orleans in Louisiana in the United States. The picture in color is of the high school in 2014 before it had been redeveloped, renovated. And the black and white picture is from the 1930s when that same site was a landfill. It was an open pit dump called the Silver City Dump. And so starting in 1942, Booker T. Washington was the second all African American high school to open in New Orleans. It closed just before Hurricane Katrina struck in 2005. And it has this real resonant legacy within New Orleans. And so my research is looking at, how was the school built on an open pit dump? After it closed, there were funds earmarked with Hurricane Katrina funding from the U.S. federal government to redevelop this school and reopen it. And so my case study traces that and the different actors involved, and the different stakes that people had in the site evaluation for redeveloping the school. They found high levels of arsenic and lead, which have been known to cause adverse health outcomes, particularly in children and young adults. So there was real concern around the risks of redeveloping this site. And so some of the kind of conclusions that we draw from this, case in New Orleans is that it really is an example of what Price and Elliott have termed a recovery machine. So within urban growth machine theory, of really thinking about recovery from disaster as this way to take federal investment, reinvest it to accumulate capital for real estate developers and others. And so it feeds this machine that can lead to all sorts of downstream impacts, such as gentrification, displacement, etc. We also find that there are differing interpretations of risk amidst redevelopment. So there are a group of alumni who are really concerned and file multiple suits to try to stop the redevelopment of the school. For them, this is clearly an environmental justice issue. It's an issue of environmental racism because it's in a predominantly Black community in New Orleans, while other alumni of the school think this is really great and really want to see their school reopened and have different tolerances for risk, with the idea that they already experience a great deal of risk from their environment. And so, it's just kind of par for the course. So another thing that comes up in this case study is who gets to determine acceptable levels of risk. So is that the city? Is that the state? Is that the environmental protection agency? So some of the consequences around who gets to decide what an acceptable level of risk is and for whom is discussed. And finally, we find that remediation is a tool of redevelopment that manufactures environmental racism. So remediation is a set of strategies and techniques to try to take out polluted soil and put in fresh soil. There have been multiple examples, also in New Orleans and elsewhere across the US and globally, that remediation is not always effective at preventing harm to communities that then experience these polluted sites. And that specifically in this case, that it manufactures environmental racism because a school is being redeveloped and built in a Black community for mostly Black students in New Orleans. And so it's this official sanctioning of environmental injustice for minoritized communities. So some conclusions are that redevelopment, in this case after disaster, which we can expect to see more of with the effects of anthropogenic climate change, really drives the production of environmental risk for an already historically marginalized community. And that results in increased social, racial, and environmental inequality. And that's disproportionately borne by New Orleanian Black residents. There's a lot of more great stuff in the paper. I hope that you'll check it out. Thanks so much.